Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
The entire world was on pins and needles earlier this week as Trump threatened to exterminate the entire civilization of Iran, never to be brought back again. On one hand, there's the political context of it all. Despite the fact that this language from Trump makes sense given everything we know about him, it's still shocking to the system to hear. Even a lot of professional journalists in the mainstream media who cover politics for a living have admitted they couldn't believe it was real when they first saw it and had to go verify it for themselves. But then there's the personal context of it all. The sinking feeling we get in our stomachs when we wonder how our Trump-supporting family members may be processing it. And then when we see some of them on social media defending it or making excuses for it. How are these people that we once shared holidays and vacations and many of the greatest memories of our lives with so lost in their loyalty to Trump? Lauren Smallcomb shared her story in her book Golden Child, My Descent to Scapegoat and Rise to Freedom. She is a certified mind-body practitioner and started Flourish Therapy along with her husband, and they live in northern Thailand. So I sat down with Lauren to discuss how she's processed the loss of family in the age of Trump. One thing a lot of us struggle with is holding the knowledge of how we got here, along with the shock factor that comes from unexpected moments. Like when our family sends us certain text messages, or when we see them post certain things online. Like on one hand, it makes sense, but on another, it can be jolting. And your story involves this dynamic a lot, especially in relationship to politics. So when you consider your story, how do you process this feeling of like, okay, yeah, this is what we'd expect, alongside the shock of seeing something that's posted or texted to you in a way that feels healthy?
In a way that feels healthy. That's an important caveat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I feel like acceptance has been important for me to when I initially like started changing, evolving, and becoming more progressive. It was like I felt such a fire to just go and educate the masses and try to help. Like if people just were educated, then they would like not believe these horrible things and do these horrible things. And I really felt passionate that I could do that. And that's why I super respect your work, because you're so vocal and you're so active in this world. But I kind of decided to pull out. And after a few years, I just felt like no one's listening. I mean, it changed, guess who I'm talking to, like who you're directing your work towards is people who are listening. But I felt like the conservative world I came from was not listening. And so for me, I had to accept that. Not to say I'm quiet anymore, but there just had to be a lot of acceptance. And for me specifically, I'm estranged from my entire family of origin, like immediate family. So there's no back and forth, there's no text, there's no Facebook posts, nothing's being seen. Although I actually can see my dad's very active politically, and I can see his page, and it's the same that it's always been. Multiple political posts, like 12 to 15 in a day, and very aggressive and very angry. And there's other family members and friends who I do see things from that are still very much in that world. And yeah, I feel like I engage when I feel like I can. And when I feel like I can't, I just try to move through it, the feelings associated with it, and not let it control my whole day and my whole, attitude, or just my sense of well-being, I guess.
Yeah, it can be frustrating because it's like, on one hand, it seems impossible for them to change. Like, there's no way this is going to happen. But on the other hand, we've changed. And
Yep.
so that's kind of a weird tension to sit with.
Yep. I agree. And a lot of people have said to me, Lauren, like, why do you say anything on social media? There's no point. Like, people don't change through social media. And I'm always like, I did. I totally changed through social media. In 2015, when Black Lives Matter was really had a lot of movement and a lot of people were being really active and talking about things, I was like, okay, I'm going to start listening. So I started reading articles and listening to podcasts, and it was totally through social media. I wouldn't have heard those things through the circle that I was with. And so I agree with you. Like people do change their perspectives and they do change their mind. That's why it matters to keep using our voices. But yeah, there's that other hand of like, these things are so deeply ingrained. How could they ever shift?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So one of the things I connected with your story in was the tension between original expectations and then later reprocessing where you're at compared to the expectations and frameworks you once had. For
Mm.
example, like when we grow up in purity culture with a certain set of expectations about marriage, or when we begin with a certain theology of the family and then later deconstruct that theology, or when we pursue something like adoption, there's the initial vision of what you feel called to, like this is a spiritual, theologically informed calling. But then when you
Yeah.
deconstruct that theology, it's like, okay, now I'm kind of in a situation here. This is where I'm at. How do you process the realization that your current reality doesn't match what you once felt called to or imagined in a way that fosters presence with where you're at and not
Mm.
discontentment?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for us, two huge things. Like my book is called Golden Child, and it's all about my story of being golden for the church, for my family, and how it led me to become a nurse, adopt, go to the mission field, like do all these golden things that I, like you said, felt like was my calling, that God Himself was, telling me to do these things. And then it all came tumbling down, and it no longer, the infrastructure that we had built our entire worldview on, crumbled. And so it's like, what do we do with these things? How do we become more our, I guess it's like a shifting of values and a shifting of like a realignment of everything. And so for us, we decided to leave the missions work we were doing. We're still in Thailand, which we came here to. My husband's a counselor, and I do different work in the wellness field. We came here to help support missionaries, but we decided this was no longer like in alignment with who we were. So we left that. We stayed in Thailand, opened our own business, and have an awesome life here now. But our whole world, we had prepared 12 years to go to the mission field. So yeah, it's a huge like 180 when you're recalibrating your whole life. I'm trying to remember what the specific question was about. Can you remind me?
Oh, just like you want to foster presence with where you're at without discontentment. Because, like, you're in Thailand and, you're sitting there, and there could be one sense in which you're thankful for the 12 years you just invested into becoming who you are because it's made you who you are. And so you can be present with that. But there's also, you can also feel a discontentment like, oh no, I just wasted 12 years of my life pursuing something I'm not a part of anymore. Like, that's kind of
Yeah,
a
yeah.
difficult tension a lot of us feel when we're going on these major journeys.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I relate to that. And I have a lot of friends who relate to that. It feels like lost time almost. And for me, I feel shame. I can like feel a bit of embarrassment, especially when I meet people outside of the church bubble, which is mostly who I see now. And it's like my story doesn't make any sense to them. I just feel like an alien. I provide neurofeedback, and I was setting up a kid for a neurofeedback session the other day, and she asked me how old I was when I got married. And this is like a kid with no framework. She's European, a
Mhm.
non-religious household. And I said 19, and she was just like, what? I had no idea how to explain to her because I couldn't use those cultural things that were like, oh, yeah, the culture, like, conservative Christianity. This is kind of how we roll. So for me, I have to work through shame and kind of like you said, I am who I am right now because of every part of my journey. And so not having shame and regret about all those years is an important part of my healing and um, acceptance of who I am. I think a really hard part for our story is we adopted twice because we felt this call. And one of our adoptions was a very traumatic 5 year long period for our whole family and for our other kids. And so that one's been really hard to reckon with because these big things we do for God aren't always benign. They have fallout. And these rose-colored glasses that we go into these things with can get tarnished, and it's like your whole world falls apart. So
Yeah.
that my partner and I have had to really work through just tremendous guilt for what we did because our kids were innocent and they didn't choose it, and yet their whole lives and neurobiology has been shaped by our choice.
Yeah. There's these like little did you know moments. I noticed one point in your book where you guys were coming home from an adoption and there was like a little cute fight in the car and or something and it was like it's like one of those moments where you look back and it's like there's kind of a lot of emotions where it's like little do you know what's about to happen.
Yeah.
There's humor in it, there's tears in it, there's maybe some anger or regret or shame. There's just a lot that you can be present with
Yeah.
when we look back on our journeys, and yet
Mm.
also, we're happy with who we are today too and who we're becoming.
Yeah.
One of the things about your journey that I thought was interesting was how none of the characters in your book are static. Like your
Mm.
parents changed over and evolved over time, you changed and
Mm.
evolved over time, your kids changed and evolved over time,
Wow.
and yet you've journeyed to very different places of healing or hierarchy.
Mm.
And so, like, how do you give space to yourself and to those you love to so that
Mm.
everyone can have their own journey while also at the same time grieving when others'
Yeah.
choices lead them to embrace hierarchy and to cause harm?
Yep. Yep. That's such a good insight. There was like constant evolution for all the characters, really. We just ended up being in very different places. Yeah. Wow. That might, I need to go spend some time with that. That's really interesting. The evolution of my children has been such a joy, and I recognize if we didn't get out of fundamentalism, we would not be able to parent them remotely well, like what they actually need. And I just feel so thankful that we support their autonomy and their individuality and their freedom to choose and all these things now that we had to kind of fight for ourselves. Like we weren't given them by our parents, right? We had to kind of claim them as our own, but now we can offer them to our kids. And it just feels so crucially important to the journey we're on together. I think that that question is something that I've actually been 5 years post estrangement just mulling over and really realizing like that my parents just another level of acceptance. Like grief and acceptance have been such a close pair for me of like grieving it, accepting it, and grieving it. And just realizing like they couldn't go to the places that I've gone. They just can't. And that doesn't absolve them of the harm, like you said, that they've caused and that they continue to cause by not repairing our relationship. But it's helped me to kind of come to terms with it more of just like their whole worldview would implode more than mine even did. And they don't have the resources emotionally, mentally, um, like in their community support, they just don't have that. And that's why they can't even go that first step, because once you open that door, it is kind of like Pandora's box and it does all
Hmm.
come to light. So, yeah, there's been a lot of grief in it and also a lot of like just coming to terms where people are at and choosing I end the book with a poem by Mary Oliver where she's talking about like the journey it's called, and where it's basically I chose to save myself, the only person that I have the power to save. And that's been a theme of my unraveling and stepping out of the golden child mold and becoming, I can love and influence other people, but I can only walk my journey and save my own self. It's it's the only way. I can't do it for anyone else.
Yeah. On the more positive side of people's journeys, like one
Hmm.
thing that kind of has been interesting for me with my kids is to think about these snapshots. So like I think about stages of my story at like age 7 being
Hmm.
physically abused by my teacher. Okay, so then when my kids become age 7, there's like a snapshot of what I experienced at that age in contrast to what they're experiencing at that age.
Beautiful.
Or
Yeah.
like my older kids are becoming teens, and at that time, like I'll occasionally, depending on where they're at, I'll occasionally bring some stuff up like when I was their age, I was afraid of the rapture, which is essentially we were going to disappear into thin air.
Yeah.
And so like we'll have a good laugh about, you know, how stressed I was thinking that the entire family disappeared into thin air when they were just, and I got left behind when they were just garage sailing. But like my
Hmm.
kids don't have that snapshot in their life.
That's right.
They're not afraid of that. And there's something like a grief that I can sit with over the fact that I had to have that fear, but there's also like a calm, satisfied,
Mm. Mm. Mm.
peace that they don't.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the beauty of creating, breaking cycles. And I use this imagery in my book of like the tree, like our ancestors, the family tree, and like creating a new branch, like just going in another healthy direction. And like we have the power to do that. It's empowering.
Yeah. So in your book, you talk about how women in patriarchal Christianity are,
Mhm.
you say, tricked into thinking they have power and autonomy in a system where they actually have none. I wonder if you could speak to that experience some, because I get the sense that
Mhm.
a lot of women in these churches don't consider themselves as powerless, and
Right.
maybe also speak to how you've noticed women reclaiming their power.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think it's such an illusion that you have power that you genuinely believe you do. I would have never thought there was power imbalances, there was people misusing their authority. Like I believed that we were all equals, all serving God, all like accountable to each other. And it's kind of crazy when I think back to what I really believed, but um, I do think that illusion is strong, and it takes some big light bulb moments for women to start opening their eyes to actually what's going on behind the curtain, which is their power is like on rent, it's on loan to them, contingent upon their compliance and them basically being the role that they are allowed to be. And, that will differ from family to family and church to church, what that looks like. But if you step out of that, you are absolutely going to lose your power. And that was what I experienced. How I've seen women, I actually just wrote a post about this today. That's funny that you say that. I was working out and I just felt like this rush of, I was listening to this playlist I have called Feminist Rage Songs. It's awesome. It's
Hmm.
such a good playlist. And I was just feeling my power. And I sat down and just wrote a quick post about like things that women do that threaten the patriarchy. And it was like starting to learn about psychology and mental health, watching documentaries and shows about cults and power dynamics, um, becoming in touch with their sexuality, becoming embodied and learning to listen to the signals that their body's telling them, becoming educated, finding purposes outside of patriarchy for them to do. And then my daughter was like, my 16-year-old daughter was like, also, the patriarchy is threatened by women who stay single and women who do not have kids and women who have jobs and positions that are male, male dominated and roles that are male dominated. Someone said, women writing about what they're learning. The questions, another one I said was women asking questions. So all of these things essentially are what I've seen myself, friends, women I've worked with, and just kind of the collective people healing from the harms of institutionalized religion. I see them doing these things and they are taking their power back.
Listening to some of those things that you mentioned there, I think something that stands out to me is how non-revolutionary they should be. Like a lot of those are basic things like writing, listening to your body. Like these are things that should
Yeah.
not be revolutionary, and yet that's how much harm patriarchy has caused.
Mhm.
That for women, like just functioning as a basic human can feel
Wow.
revolutionary.
That's really, that like makes me feel emotional. Yeah, exactly.
And it feels like a lot of the things that give them life in that patriarchy then they kind of like when you're out of it, it comes across like they're these cute little toys that they're allowed to play with, or they're like little breadcrumbs. Um,
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis talked about, and this is one thing that I remember I always heard in evangelicalism. C.S. Lewis would talk about splashing in mud puddles when you could have a holiday by the sea. And that
Hmm.
always like was used to say, so therefore you should all become evangelicals and be part of the
Mm.
patriarchy, basically. And yet
Hmm.
um it feels like so much of it's sad how the things that give us joy in those submission paradigms are like
Yeah.
you can work in the nursery, you can clean the bathrooms, you can
Right.
cook the food, which like again, those things should be fun things. Like cooking can be fun. But
Yeah.
when you're relegated to that as like a submission role, it takes the life out of it.
Yeah.
So at one point you say in your book, you say, so much heartache and loss fill the pages of my life, and so many people have similar stories. I'm going to write it so others can be reminded they're not alone. So as you've sat with your own story and with the stories of
Mm.
others in this world, how have you experienced healing from
Okay.
leaving that world?
While writing, go figure, writing, such a revolutionary act, writing helped me really make sense of my story. So just like sifting through scene after scene of my life, connecting the dots, it was so much freaking work. I mean, it was so much work to try and make sense of this narrative that on the surface looked really beautiful, white picket fence, middle class, American family, religious, but underneath it, when you really got to the true dynamics, like there's a lot of dysfunction and a lot of loss and a lot of grief that has come. Um, Healing for me has been a really slow process of consistent grief. Like grieving, I didn't really know how to grieve before 2020 when I became estranged from my family. I just was entered into this space where if I didn't have grief in this process of grief to constantly be in and cycling through, I think I would have died. Like I don't want to be dramatic. I really don't know how I would have made it through. I was so heartbroken. I was absolutely devastated, shattered. And so the grief like gave me something to do, even though it's abstract, it was very much an emotional process to do to honor the love that I had for these people I lost, to honor myself and my story and how I was changing, and to just make space for the reality of my life, which was 180 degrees from what I ever thought it would be. So grief work, movement, yoga was really big in the beginning. I just needed to move, like really basic movements. Going to the gym made me feel power, made me feel alive again. Music was really powerful. I had a few different counselors that were really helpful. Did some EMDR, which helped with my nightmares. I was having a lot of nightmares about my family. My pets were really healing. My friends were incredibly, incredibly healing. Yeah, those are the big things that I just kept going to find myself and to, make sense of my story moving forward.
Yeah. I think on the writing piece too, a lot of people can be intimidated by the idea of writing a memoir, especially
Yeah.
for public consumption.
Right?
Um, but like there's for me, there were elements of writing that really helped break a lot of it open for me at the beginning, where
Yeah.
um, just a simple exercise like putting your top 10 high points in life and top 10 hard times in life on a sheet of paper in a bullet list form, and then like putting those on a timeline of
Mm,
where they happened in your life, and
so good.
like realizing like rank them from 1 to 10, and what's the how much impact did they have on your life,
Yeah.
and doing that and actually like sitting down and seeing that on a sheet of paper just broke me to where I started crying, and um I said I had no idea how hurt I was, and like all of that I had been holding in. And so then like from there starting to then okay, what's are there chapters that have been developing throughout this
Mm,
timeline? What could I name
mm,
them? And like these are things you don't have to be a professional writer. You don't have to write a
right.
public memoir. These are all things that people can do at their kitchen table
Yeah.
to begin processing their story.
Yep. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend. And then even sharing with some safe people, like sharing what they're discovering. Because the process of writing for me, and I think for others, was just so insight rich. Like I would have a really deep writing session on a Saturday. I would write on the weekends and think like, oh my gosh, this is the pinnacle of understanding this. And then the next day I would go even deeper. And it was like, how is there so much insight just from like, kind of think of it like soil and what are those things called that tilling the soil and stuff just comes. And so I would encourage people like have someone safe. If there's no one in your world that feels safe, do it with a therapist. But to process those things that you're realizing, it's really healing.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I've noticed a number of people that have read your book discussing
Mm.
is or mentioning is how they've appreciated the vulnerability that you had in it,
Yeah.
and they also
Yeah.
felt that they could see their story in yours and everything. So, I appreciate you coming on and sharing it with us. Is there a place people can find you or
Yeah.
see what
Yeah. I'd
you're
love
doing
to
today?
connect. So if they're interested in the book, they can get on Amazon, Golden Child by Lauren Smallcomb. And if they're interested in connecting with us and the work we're doing in the world, we own a practice called Flourish Therapy. My husband and I work with people virtually and where we live in Thailand and help people heal. We see a lot of folks who were part of the church. We didn't like plan for that to be a niche, but it just ended up kind of becoming one. And lots of healing from purity culture and from um, difficult marriages and difficult families of origin, difficult religious experiences. So yeah, Flourish Therapy is on Instagram and Facebook. People can find us flourish_therapy or at our site, flourishtherapy.co.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, Be sure to follow BNG Daily at BaptistNews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at BaptistNews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.